Alright, my IOP presentation is on the Cold War, and it's going to be giving historical context to the novel that we read recently called The Things They Carried. And now, within the novel The Things They Carried, one of the main components of this novel, one of the main focuses on this novel, is the fact that these young men in Vietnam are fighting within this foreign environment, and they wonder why they're fighting this war, who they're fighting this war for, and what's the point of it all. And this is basically going to be illuminating some of the political reasons, at least, why this war was fought, and many other wars like it. It's going to be giving historical context to this war, and actually the historical context plays into one of the major themes of The Things They Carried that I found, which was alienation and being in a foreign environment, not knowing, why you're there. And the Cold War was very much based on foreign relations. And we're going to be discussing who fought, where this war was fought, and why it was fought within this presentation. And so the main combatants, as you will, are going to be communist Russia and democratic capitalist United States. These two superpowers would come to dominate global politics throughout this period, and the struggle between each for supremacy is going to be known as the Cold War. And communism wanted worldwide socialism, and capitalism wanted more markets in which to dispose of its goods. And the Cold War wasn't actually cold for a lot of countries. In a lot of places, the Cold War heated up, so to speak, and became full-blown conflicts known as proxy wars. We'll be discussing that later in the video, and this is what we see in The Things They Carried. So we already answered the question of who and where. One of the places that this was fought was Vietnam, as we see in The Things They Carried, but also many other places that you might not have heard of. All right, so first thing we're going to be discussing is capitalism and the economic and political system that this entails. So capitalism is based on free enterprise and free markets, and basically advocates the hoarding of wealth for the individual and individual actions creating a better and more prosperous world. And one of the major upsides of this type of governmental organization is democracy. You had public oversight for officials so that you didn't become susceptible to corruption. And this wasn't always the case, but in a lot of cases, free market capitalism is followed by democracy. One of the major advocates of this political system, obviously, is the United States of America. It's a system that we live in today, and yes, it has its flaws, but it's pretty damn great. And, the American dream, proud to be an American, working your way up from the bottom through just pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, that's a very powerful idea. And, however, as I said before, the system wasn't perfect. And one of the major issues with this system, and the reason why a lot of these regimes were created against capitalism, was economic inequality. You had owners of giant businesses locking out other proponents or other competitors of the market through sheer massive size, and employing huge workforces to basically work in slavish conditions before you had labor reform. And also, another downside of this system of governmental organization is corruption. Capitalist systems are prone to corruption, just as any other governmental system is. But when you have gigantic businesses, it starts to blur the lines between what's a business and what is government. A lot of the positions become one and the same. And one of the major key components of capitalism that makes it so great is you have independent producers, which create a varied economy. Communism, in the state that we've seen it within the Cold War, just can't compete with so many independent producers producing all of the goods that a society needs. Because if you have a state try and centralize all of the means of production, then you're not able to produce everything a society needs at once. And so now we're going to go into what is communism. And communism is a little hard to explain sometimes, but I'm going to do my best. And basically, it's a political and economic system based on central power. Central power is the main focus of this system. And this might be confusing because you hear, communism being about power to the people or whatever, but I'm going to go into that in a little bit. All right, so the political end of communism is focused on what we would call a strongman, basically someone who seizes power through a revolution, and he declares himself leader. The people don't elect him, but he says he's representing the people, and obviously this has major downsides because you can say you're representing the people and do nothing for them. So what you end up having happen is something that I like to call power to the state. The people don't see any of the power that the state claims that they're giving to them, but the state makes sure that it is protected, the bureaucrats and everything else. And one of the main ways you can find this is centralized democracy, in which you would have elections of party officials. And these were supposedly free elections, but any dissenting opinion after the committee decided was met with harsh police brutality. And basically, now we're going to get into the economic aspect of communism. And communism focuses on industry, particularly heavy industry, and disregards agriculture, seeing it as feudal and primitive. So what you end up having happen is the state takes control of a lot of these assets to make sure that people are doing what the state sees fit in something called 5-year plans. So you have state-controlled industries and national banks. And this wasn't always a bad thing, because it did provide stability, but it did not always ensure growth. And they couldn't have that varied economy I was talking about earlier under a central plan. And so one of the main advocates of communism is basically that everyone has the means of production. Everyone has the tools they need to help their society, and any goods they create goes to the society at large. At least that's the idea. And so now we're going to get into why these two systems of government and systems of political organization were so opposed during this period of about 1945, at the end of the Second World War, my bad, to about 1991, the fall of the Soviet Union. So basically, before World War II, communism and capitalism were allies because they did have a lot of the same ideas. Both wanted an egalitarian society, but both failed to provide that to its people. There were still massive inequalities between state bureaucrats on the communist side and wealthy business owners on the capitalist side. But the main reason that this conflict starts and this conflict blows up between the two is not because of their ideological dispositions, but rather because of land after the fall of Nazi Germany. And this is going to be the why of the Cold War, because after the fall of Nazi Germany, you had all this land available to both of these contending superpowers, and both of them wanted this land, communism to bring about worldwide revolution, and capitalism to further spread markets throughout the world. And this would rock the world afterwards, because it not only became about the massive amounts of land that Nazi Germany left off, but land around the world after World War II. And the ideological argument came as a justification rather than as the initial cause. The initial cause was the cession of land by Nazi Germany after World War II. So basically, the Cold War wasn't always so cold. You didn't have these tensions between them all the time, even throughout the period of 1945 to 1991. And this period, about 1970 to 1980, was known as Detente. And basically this happened after the Cuban Missile Crisis and the realization that we could very well destroy each other. So cooperation was probably our best bet. You had a lot of steps towards liberalization during this period, most notably under Khrushchev and Mikhail Gorbachev. Under Khrushchev, you have de-Stalinization, but under Khrushchev, you have Glasnost and Perestroika, which is opening of these communist bloc countries. But now we're going to get into the main part of the Cold War that really relates back to the things they carried as well. And I've been giving a lot of historical context, but now I'm going to go into what the things they carried has to do with the Cold War. And this is proxy wars. Basically what would happen is you'd have these communist and capitalist superpowers, the United States and America, funding opposing armies of regions that they had no clue about. Regions that were fighting for reasons besides communism and capitalism. But they would end up funding the opposing armies and basically seeing who comes out on top, testing their new weaponry, trying to cause fear into their opponent. And obviously this isn't the best strategy for bringing about world peace or even stability. And it led to authoritarian regimes, regardless of if they were capitalist or communist, because these were regimes based on war. These were not based on peaceful negotiations. These were not based on ideals. These were based on violent conflict. And it would destabilize these regions immensely, because you would have a war basically funded by gigantic entities way larger than the country itself. And you would have munitions go off, and munitions still in those areas, and farmland destroyed by armies vastly larger, even sometimes than their population. And what this also did on the home front was it destroyed public funding. So there was no new public funds, and this would lead to major resentment in Afghanistan and Vietnam, especially because so much money was being poured into these conflicts that really had nothing to do with the people. And this would also lead to horrible atrocities, because you had in the things they carried, we even see this basically boys being thrown to war when they really aren't ready, and this was a horrible tragedy this had to happen. Alright, that's the presentation. Thank you for watching. I appreciate it, and I hope it was